There is this very specific, almost universal experience that happens in modern art museums. I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking
It's
about.
like a ritual. You're walking through a gallery. Maybe you've just been looking at, I don't know, a Rembrandt or a really nice photorealistic landscape where a tree looks exactly like a tree.
Uh-huh. You're feeling good. You're feeling cultured.
Totally. Feeling calm, intellectual. You turn a corner, expecting maybe another portrait, and then boom, you're just confronted by this wall of what looks like absolute, utter chaos.
It's a Jackson Pollock room. It's an ambush.
It is an ambush. You're standing in front of something enormous, like number one, 1950, your Autumn Rhythm. It's huge, it's imposing, and it's just this sprawling, tangled web of splatters and lines and drips.
Right.
And I swear, if you just stand there quietly for 30 seconds, you will hear someone nearby lean over and whisper the 5 most famous words in all of art criticism.
My kid could do that.
Exactly. My kid could do that. Or I could do that in my garage with a blindfold on. It's the classic reaction.
It is. And, it's an understandable one. To the untrained eye, it doesn't register as skill. It registers as an accident.
It looks like he just tripped over a paint can. Or maybe it was just flailing his arms around in a tantrum and happened to get lucky.
It's a very forgiving assumption to make, honestly, because visually, it's just noise. It lacks all the structure we're trained to look for in Western art. There's no focal point, no horizon line, no recognizable figures. It just looks like a mess.
But that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. Our mission today is to completely methodically dismantle that myth. We are going to take that "my kid could do that" sentiment and run it through a gauntlet of physics, mathematics, and get this, neuroscience.
Because the sources we're digging into today, they argue that what Pollock was doing in that drafty barn on Long Island wasn't random at all.
Not even a little bit random.
No, not even close. In fact, the science suggests that if your kid tried to do it, they would fail. If you tried to do it, you would fail spectacularly.
Right. Because the argument we're going to explore is that hidden inside that seeming chaos is a very specific, very precise mathematical fingerprint, a code.
Mm-hmm.
And that Pollock wasn't just, slinging paint. He was completely unknowingly acting as a kind of natural physicist.
Mm-hmm.
He was intuitively mastering the laws of nature, things like fluid dynamics and fractal geometry, decades before scientists even had the full language to describe what he was doing.
That is the aha moment for this whole topic, I think. We have this tendency to put art in one box and science in a completely separate box. Pollock just smashes those boxes together.
He really does.
We're going to see that he was accessing a type of geometry that is absolutely fundamental to how the universe is built. He was basically painting the operating system of nature itself.
And we have a serious stack of sources to back this up. This isn't just us riffing on art theory. We've got peer-reviewed papers from journals like Nature and Physics World. We have forensic analysis reports from these high-stakes, multi-million-dollar forgery cases.
We've also got research on something called fractal fluency from neuroscience labs and essays on biophilic design. It's a really broad spectrum.
So we're really going on a journey here. We're going from the windswept barns along Island in the 1940s to modern physics labs, and then all the way to the design of the buildings you might be sitting in right now.
Yeah, it's a huge scope. We're going to start, back in 1947, looking at the actual mechanics of paint, literally the fluid dynamics of how liquid moves and hits a canvas. Then we'll get into the math. What is a fractal, and how do you even measure one?
And then comes the detective story, the matter paintings controversy. This is where scientists try to use this math to authenticate the huge cache of supposed Pollocks.
And that's where it gets really contentious. I mean, it becomes a full-blown scientific feud.
Yeah.
It really pushes the limits of how much science can or should explain art.
But then, and this is my favorite part, we're going to end up deep inside your own head. We're going to look at the neuroscience of why, despite that initial "my kid could do that" reaction, your brain actually loves looking at these paintings.
Why it literally makes you feel good physiologically. It's wild.
It's a trip from the canvas to the cortex. So let's set the stage. To understand the code, we first have to understand the man and the moment. It's 1945. Jackson Pollock is leaving New York City.
And this is a monumental shift. You have to understand the context. Pollock was living in Manhattan.
Right. The ultimate grid.
The ultimate Euclidean environment. I mean, it is a world of straight lines, skyscrapers, grids, boxes, right angles. It's a geometry that humans impose on the world. He gets out of there, packs up with his wife, Lee Krasner, and moves to a farmhouse with a barn in East Hampton, Long Island.
And this barn becomes the laboratory. It's not some pristine white-walled studio. It's unheated, it's drafty, the floorboards are uneven, it's a rough rural space.
And it's there that he completely changes his perspective. He stops looking at the city and starts really looking at nature. He'd spend hours just sitting on his back porch, staring at the landscape, the tangled undergrowth, the way the wind moved the tall grass, the bare winter trees against the sky.
There's that famous story, right, where another artist asks him if he works from nature.
Yes, the artist Hans Hofmann. He asks him, do you work from nature? Meaning, do you set up an easel and paint a picture of that tree over there? And Pollock's reply is legendary. He just says, I am nature.
I am nature. Now, on the surface, that sounds incredibly arrogant. It sounds like the kind of thing a pretentious artist says at a gallery opening. Oh, darling, I don't paint the wind. I am the wind.
It does sound that way, 100%. But in the context of the physics we're about to unpack, it's actually shockingly literal. He wasn't trying to represent nature anymore. He wasn't trying to paint a picture of a flower.
He was trying to paint like a flower grows.
Exactly. He was trying to replicate the process of nature. He wanted to use the same forces, gravity, flow, viscosity, chaos, and let them create the image. He wanted to become a conduit for those natural processes.
So the first step in doing that is to get rid of the easel. That's the first huge break from centuries of tradition.
Completely. He takes these massive canvases, sometimes it was sailcloth he got from a local sailmaker, so it's this really rough, heavy material, and he unrolls them flat on the floor of the barn.
He said he needed to be in the painting. He wanted to walk around it, work from all four sides, not just stand in front of it.
Right. And this brings us to the first major misconception we need to clear up right away. We always call them drip paintings. Jackson Pollock, Jack the Dripper. It's a great nickname. It's in all the textbooks.
I've been calling them drip paintings my whole life. You're saying that's wrong.
Well, if you talk to a fluid dynamicist, a physicist who studies how liquids move, they will tell you that drip is a complete misnomer.
Okay, so he wasn't dripping. What was he doing?
Not in the physics sense of the word. Let's really break down what a drip is. Think of a leaky faucet. A drip implies that the liquid is gathering, hanging there for a second, and then breaking off into a discrete, separate little droplet.
Okay, yeah. Drip, drip.
That breaking process is often caused by something in physics called the plateau-Rayleigh instability.
Plateau-Rayleigh instability. That sounds like something out of Star Trek.
It does, but it's super common. It's all about surface tension. Surface tension is this force that wants to minimize the surface area of a liquid. And what's the shape with the smallest surface area for a given volume?
A sphere.
A sphere, exactly. So if you have a long, thin stream of liquid falling, surface tension is constantly trying to pull that stream apart into little spheres, into drops. If you hold a spoon of honey high enough and let it pour, eventually that long stream will break up into individual drops.
Right, I can picture that. The stream gets thinner and thinner until plink, it snaps.
That's it. Now, Pollock didn't want drops. If you get up close to his canvases, really stick your nose in there, you'll see there are actually very few individual splats or drops. He wanted continuous lines. He wanted a web, a tangle. If the paint broke into drops, the web would be broken. The line would be lost.
So if he wasn't dripping, was he just pouring?
He was jetting. The scientific analysis of his technique, looking at the films of him working, shows he was using continuous streams or jets of fluid. And this is where that natural physicist label really starts to make sense. He was using these highly viscous industrial paints.
This wasn't fancy artist oil paint from a tiny tube.
No, not at all. This was the hardware store stuff. House paint, enamel, aluminum paint, stuff that was meant for painting cars or radiators. It was goop. It was thick and sticky.
Okay.
And he figured out completely through trial and error exactly how to manipulate this goop. Let's do another thought experiment. Think about pouring honey on a piece of toast. If you pour it slowly from a short height, what does it do when it hits the toast?
It coils up. It makes those little loops, like a rope falling on the deck of a ship. It piles up on itself.
Perfect analogy. That is a phenomenon called coiling instability. It happens when a viscous fluid hits a surface. It basically buckles under its own weight because it's moving faster than it can spread out. Now, the physicists who analyzed Pollock's canvases, a team led by Andrzej Hertyski, found something incredible.
What did they find?
Pollock almost completely avoided this coiling instability. His lines are long, straight, or gently curving filaments. They don't pile up in those little ropey coils.
But how? If the paint is thick like honey, shouldn't it coil?
It should, unless you know how to fight the physics. And he did. He learned to move his hand at a sufficiently high speed, and he kept the paint can, or the stick, at just the right height above the canvas to suppress that coiling.
He was stretching the paint out as it fell. He was stretching it out. He created these long filaments that did two things. They didn't break into drops, so he was fighting the plateau Rayleigh instability, and they didn't coil into piles, so he was fighting the coiling instability. So when people say he was just flailing his arms around, they are missing the fact that he was actually executing this incredibly precise physical maneuver to control fluid dynamics.
Precisely. He was creating a perfect balance between velocity, viscosity, and gravity. He was enlisting gravity as a co-conspirator, as he put it. He's not touching the canvas with a brush, remember? He's working in the air above it. He had to have this deep, intuitive understanding of how the paint would behave as it fell through the air and hit the surface.
Wow. So it wasn't random flailing. It was a form of mastery. He basically turned his own body into a machine that could output a very specific, very controlled type of fluid flow.
That's a great way to put it. He was a human paint jetting machine. And it wasn't just his arm. The sources go on to talk about his movement around the canvas. This is where we get into something called levee flights.
Okay, I saw this in the notes. Levee flights. It sounds like an airline. Or maybe something very elegant in French.
It does, but it's actually a concept from biology and statistics. A levee flight is a specific type of random walk.
Okay, break that down for us. What's a random walk?
So imagine you lost your keys in a big open field. If you just take tiny random steps in all directions, you'll mostly just circle around where you started. You don't cover much ground. That's a standard random walk, sometimes called Brownian motion.
Right, you're just kind of puttering around.
Exactly. A levee flight is different. It's a pattern where you take a whole bunch of small, concentrated steps in one area, really searching it thoroughly, and then suddenly you take a huge long-distance jump to a completely new area, and you start the process over again.
So it's like, let's cluster, cluster, cluster. Big J-U-M-P. Then cluster, cluster, cluster over here.
You've got it. And it turns out this is nature's optimal search strategy. It's how predators find food. Albatrosses do this when they're scanning the vast ocean for fish. Sharks do it, deer do it when foraging, even our own eyes do it when we're scanning a new scene.
So it's the most efficient way to find something when you don't know where it is.
It maximizes your chance of finding prey or resources with the least amount of wasted energy. It covers the most ground while still allowing for detailed searching.
And you're telling me Pollock was doing this around his canvases?
The analysis of his movements, which they've reconstructed from the famous films of him painting, shows that he was moving around the canvas in a levee flight pattern.
That's wild.
It is. He would do these small, intricate motions with his hand and his wrist to create the dense webs in one corner of the painting. But then he would use his whole body, his legs and torso, to make these long, sweeping, ballistic trajectories across the canvas to a new spot.
So he was physically embodying the patterns of nature. He wasn't just painting a forest. He was moving like an animal foraging in a forest.
Yes. He was bridging the gap between the small scale, the intricate fluid dynamics of the paint, and the large scale, the overall composition of the painting, using this biological motion pattern. It connects his body directly to the final image.
And I saw that one of the main researchers in this field, Richard Taylor, he actually built a robot to test this theory.
The Pollockizer. Yes, I love this experiment. Richard Taylor is a physicist at the University of Oregon, and he's really the central figure in this whole fractal expressionism field. He wanted to prove this wasn't just, poetic speculation.
He wanted to see if he could replicate it mechanically.
Exactly. So he built a chaotic pendulum. Think of a paint bucket with a hole in the bottom, swinging on a string over a canvas.
Like a big grandfather clock pendulum, but with paint.
Sort of, but much messier. To make it chaotic, he put magnets on the bottom of the bucket and then placed other repelling magnets on the floor underneath. So as the bucket swung, the magnets would randomly kick it and push it around. The motion became erratic, unpredictable.
And what was the result? Did it look like a Pollock?
It looked remarkably like a Pollock. The machine, the Pollockizer, created these beautiful, complex fractal patterns. It was the proof of concept. It showed that if you couple chaotic motion with the right fluid dynamics, you will naturally generate these specific structures.
So Pollock's chaos wasn't just random noise. It was a physical recording of his chaotic but structured motion. He was a living, breathing, chaotic pendulum.
That's the argument. He was a human Pollockizer.
Okay, so we've established the physical technique. He's jetting paint, not dripping. He's moving in levee flights. But the title of this deep dive is The Chaos Code. And the code we keep mentioning is fractals. we need to unpack what a fractal actually is.
Right.
Because I think for a lot of people, when they hear that word, they just think of those, trippy, colorful, psychedelic screensavers from the 90s.
That is the #1 association. That or tie-dye shirts.
Right.
But fractals are much, much older and more fundamental than computers. They are essentially the geometry of the natural world.
Okay, so give us the simple layman's definition.
In the simplest terms, a fractal is a pattern that repeats itself in different scales. The technical term for this is self-similarity.
Give me the explain it like I'm five metaphor.
The absolute classic example is a Russian nesting doll. You open the big doll, and inside there's a smaller doll that looks identical. You open that one, there's another identical but even smaller doll, and so on.
Okay, I get that. But that's a perfect repetition. Nature isn't that neat.
No, it's not. In nature, it's more organic, more statistical. So think about a tree. You have the main trunk. It splits into large branches. If you were to cut off one of those large branches and stand it up on the ground, it would look like a miniature version of the whole tree.
Right, it has the same basic structure.
Then that branch splits into smaller branches, then into twigs. Each part at each scale looks kind of like the whole thing. The structure is preserved as you zoom in. That's a natural fractal.
And the famous mathematical example is the coastline of Britain, right?
Yeah.
The coastline paradox. It's a brilliant thought experiment from Benoit Mandelbrot, the father of fractal geometry. He asked, how long is the coastline of Britain? And the answer is, it depends on your ruler.
It depends on your ruler. If you measure it with a 100-mile-long ruler, you get a certain length. You just bridge over all the little bays and inlets. But if you measure it with a 1-mile ruler, you have to go in and out of every single bay and cove, so the total length gets much, much longer.
And if you used a 1-inch ruler, you'd have to go around every single rock on the beach, and the length would become astronomical.
Exactly. The closer you look, the more detail, the more length you find. That property, that statistical roughness that stays consistent no matter how much you zoom in, that is the signature of a fractal.
And this is what makes it so different from the geometry we all learned in high school.
Completely different. High school geometry is Euclidean geometry. It's the geometry of human-made things. Squares, circles, triangles, perfectly straight lines, smooth surfaces. But as Mandelbrot said, nature isn't smooth. Clouds are not spheres, mountains are not cones, and lightning does not travel in a straight line.
So Pollock was painting nature's geometry, not man's geometry.
Yes. He was capturing that roughness, that complexity. So when Richard Taylor first analyzed Pollock's paintings, he wasn't looking for recognizable shapes. He was measuring something called the fractal dimension, which is usually represented by the letter D.
Okay, this is where it gets a little mind-bending for me.
Yeah.
I understand 1 dimension, like a line. 2 dimensions, a flat square. 3 dimensions, a cube. How can you have a dimension D that's a decimal? How can something be, say, 1.5 dimensional?
It's a great question because it's not intuitive. Think of it less as a spatial dimension and more as a measure of complexity or how well a pattern fills the space it's in.
Okay.
So let's take your examples. A perfectly straight line is 1-dimensional. It's very simple. A completely filled in black square is 2-dimensional. It fills the plane 100%.
Got it. A line is 1, a filled square is 2.
Now imagine you take that 1-dimensional line, but you start to crinkle it and wiggle it and fold it back on itself over and over again. It's still technically a line, so it starts as 1D. But it's so wiggly that it starts to take up space on the page, almost like a 2D shape would. It's trying to become a plane.
So a really, really messy, tangled line is more dimensional than a straight one.
Exactly. It occupies more space than a simple line, but still has gaps, so it occupies less space than a solid square. Its dimension is somewhere between 1 and 2. The more complex and space-filling the crinkly line is, the closer its D value gets to 2.
I think I'm getting it. It's a measure of roughness or jaggedness.
That's a perfect way to think about it. And Pollock's paintings sit squarely in that decimal space between 1 and 2. A very sparse, loose, web-like painting might have a D value of, say, 1.1. It's mostly empty space. A really dense, chaotic, thicket-like painting might be a 1.9. It's almost a solid surface of paint.
And the sources show that Pollock's own D value actually changed and evolved over the course of his career. This wasn't a static thing for him.
This is one of the most incredible findings in Taylor's research, and it really argues against the "it was an accident" theory. It shows that Pollock was tuning his ability, he was getting better at it.
So what does that timeline look like?
In 1943, with his very first preliminary drip works, the D value is very low, around 1.0. They were very loose, simple, single-layer webs. But then, by 1947, his transitional period, the D rises significantly to about 1.45.
Okay, getting more complex. And then we hit the big year, 1950, the classic period.
Yes. These are the masterpieces everyone knows. Autumn Rhythm, Lavender Mist, #1, 1950. Here, the fractal dimension peaks at an astonishing 1.89. These are incredibly complex, multi-layered, dense paintings. It's like he was learning how to pack more and more and more chaos into the canvas without it just becoming a solid, muddy blob. He was maximizing the complexity.
And then after that peak, it actually dropped off a bit, didn't it?
It did. By 1952, in his later works like Blue Poles, the D value drops slightly to around 1.72. The complexity is still very high, but it's a little less dense than that 1950 peak. It's a clear, measurable evolution.
The analysis also revealed something else really cool about his process, something called the anchor layer.
Oh, right. This is fascinating. This gets at the psychology of his creation process.
Taylor's team found that the very first layer of paint that Pollock put down on the canvas, which was usually black paint, that first layer determined the entire fractal quality of the finished painting.
Yes. He might have spent, say, 20 or 30 minutes putting down this initial black web, but that short burst of activity defined the fractal soul of the work. If you digitally isolate and analyze just that first black layer, the final fractal dimension is already there.
So 20 minutes to lay down the entire mathematical skeleton of the painting, and then he'd spend 6 months finishing it.
Sometimes, yeah. You would spend months and months coming back to it, adding layers of color white, brown, silver aluminum paint. But those subsequent layers just reinforced and fine-tuned the dimension that was already established. They were like decoration on a pre-existing structure.
The fractal blueprint was immediate and intuitive.
It suggests he had this deeply internalized physical understanding of the pattern he was trying to create. He knew exactly what he was doing from the very first splash.
Okay, so we have this mathematical signature. We can measure the D value. We can see its evolution over time. This naturally leads us into the detective story part of our deep dive, because if you can measure a unique fingerprint, surely you can use it to prove if a painting is a real Pollock or a clever fake, right?
You would think so. It seems like the perfect forensic tool, a holy grail for art authenticators. If every real Pollock has this specific fractal fingerprint, then a forgery shouldn't have it.
And that is exactly what they tried to do.
It is. This brings us to the famous or infamous matter paintings controversy.
This whole thing plays out like a great thriller movie plot. Set the scene for us.
Okay, it's 2002. A man named Alex Matter discovers a cache of 32 small paintings in a storage locker in Waynescott, New York. His parents were Herbert and Mercedes Matter, who were artists and very close friends with Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner.
So the backstory, the provenance is at least plausible. My parents were friends with the artist. We found these in the attic. That's usually how these stories start.
Exactly. And the paintings, they look like Pollock's. They're done in his style. They're wrapped in brown paper. If they're real, this is the art discovery of the century. They are potentially worth tens of millions of dollars.
Oh, if they're fake.
They are completely worthless curiosities, so the stakes are astronomically high.
The Pollock-Krasner Foundation, which handles his estate, must have been very interested but also very skeptical. Extremely skeptical. This is where they call in Richard Taylor, our physicist from Oregon. They commissioned him to use his fractal analysis method as a forensic tool. They want to know, do these newfound paintings have the authentic Pollock fractal fingerprint, the moment of truth? What did his analysis find?
He ran his box counting analysis. That's the standard computer algorithm for measuring fractals. You lay a grid of virtual boxes over a high-res image of the painting and count how many boxes have paint in them. Then you make the boxes smaller and count again, and so on.
And the verdict?
His findings, which he published, were that the paintings had significant deviations from Pollock's signature fractal dimension.
Deviations meaning the math was wrong.
Meaning the math was wrong. The fractal dimension wasn't consistent across different scales. The self-similarity broke down. Based on this, he declared that they were likely inauthentic.
Case closed. Right. Science says they're fakes.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars saved.
You'd think so, but far from it. This is where the story gets really juicy. Taylor's conclusion triggered a massive scientific feud.
Okay. Enter the antagonists of this scientific drama. Catherine Jones Smith and Harsh Mathur, two physicists from Case Western Reserve University. They read Taylor's paper and essentially said, hold on a minute, this net you're casting is way, way too wide.
Oh!
And this is where the famous doodle comes in, right? I love this part because it's so beautifully cheeky. It's such a great scientific clapback.
It is fantastic. Jones Smith basically opened up Microsoft Paint or a similar program and in a few minutes drew a crude doodle. It was just a bunch of overlapping starburst shapes. She called it Untitled 5 as a joke.
Just a quick scribble?
A scribble. She then ran her own doodle through the exact same fractal analysis algorithm that Taylor was using. And guess what?
Let me guess. It passed the test with flying colors.
It passed. According to the criteria Taylor was using at the time, her 5-minute scribble was fractal enough to be a Pollock.
So her argument was essentially, if my cartoon starbursts count as a Pollock, then your mathematical test doesn't actually prove anything about Pollock.
That was precisely her argument. She said that Taylor's definition of fractal was too loose, too forgiving. See, in pure mathematics, a true, perfect fractal repeats its pattern forever. You can zoom in infinitely, and the pattern will always be there.
Right, but you can't do that with a painting.
Yeah.
Eventually, you zoom in so far, you're just looking at the grain of the canvas or the individual molecules of pigment.
Exactly. Physical objects in the real world are limited. Pollock's fractals, as beautiful as they are, only span about 3 orders of magnitude in scale. That's a size range of about 1,000 to 1, from the whole canvas down to the smallest splatter.
And her point was that 3 orders of magnitude isn't enough.
Her point was that it's not enough to be a unique, foolproof identifier. She argued that lots of things could show fractal-like behavior over such a limited range, including simple scribbles. She basically accused Taylor of confirmation bias, of finding faces in the clouds.
That is a pretty damning critique. Your magic authentication formula also validates my doodles. So who won the argument? Was Taylor just wrong?
It's complicated. Taylor pushed back, of course. He argued that the doodle didn't visually look like a Pollock, which is true, and that his full analysis was more nuanced than just one number. He refined his parameters. But the controversy really damaged the credibility of fractal analysis as a standalone tool.
So how did the matter painting saga actually end? Do we know if they're real or fake?
We do.
And the resolution came from something much more old school and definitive. Chemistry. Good old-fashioned chemistry. The hard science.
Exactly. Pigment analysis. Researchers at the Harvard Art Museums did a microscopic analysis of the paint used in the matter paintings. They found specific pigments, a particular type of red, known as red 254, and a brown synthetic iron oxide, that were not commercially available until years, in some cases decades, after Pollock died in 1956.
Oof. Okay, that is the smoking gun. You cannot paint with a color that hasn't been invented yet.
It is the undeniable final nail in the coffin. So Taylor's conclusion was correct. They were fakes. But Joan Smith's critique of his method was also valid. Fractal analysis alone wasn't a magic bullet.
So it's like he got the right answer, but for maybe not the most rigorous reasons.
That's a fair summary. It was a really important moment for the field. It taught everyone that you can't just rely on one algorithm to solve the deep mysteries of art. It needs to be part of a larger toolkit alongside provenance research and material science.
And I assume the technology has gotten much better since that feud in the early 2000s.
Oh, it's exploded. The field is way more sophisticated now. Scientists don't just look for one single fractal dimension anymore. Now they use multifractals.
Multifractals.
Yeah, instead of averaging the complexity into one single D number for the whole painting, they look at a whole spectrum of different fractal dimensions that exist in different parts of the canvas. It's a much richer fingerprint. They also measure something called lacunarity.
Lacunarity.
Oh!
I'm definitely adding that to my vocabulary. What does it mean?
It's a fantastic word. It's a fancy term for gappiness or clumpiness. It measures how the gaps and empty spaces are distributed in a pattern. So you could have 2 patterns with the exact same fractal dimension, but one might have big, gaping holes, and the other might have small, evenly distributed holes. Lacunarity can tell them apart.
And I'm going to guess AI is involved now, too.
Of course AI is involved. Heavily. Recent studies claim that by combining all of these features, the multifractal spectrum, the lacunarity, other statistical measures, and feeding all of that data into a machine learning algorithm, they can now distinguish a real Pollock from a fake with 96 to 99% accuracy.
That is incredible. So the computer has learned to see the soul of the painting, or at least the unique signature of Pollock's physical movements, better than even a trained human eye.
In a statistical sense, yes. It's not looking for beauty, it's looking for the consistency of the physics of the artist's hand motion. A forger might try to look chaotic, but their micro-movements are often too hesitant, too slow, too controlled. The math, especially with AI, can now catch that hesitation.
Which brings us right back to the human element. We've talked about the physics of the paint, the math of the pattern, the forensics of the forgery. But I want to pivot now to the listener. Why do we care? Why do people stand in front of these chaotic webs and feel something? I mean, these paintings sell for $140 million.
Yeah.
There has to be more to it than just it's mathematically complex and hard to fake.
This, for me, is the most exciting part of the entire story. This is where we get into the field of neuroaesthetics. And it turns out Pollock wasn't just creating a cool pattern. He was, perhaps accidentally, hacking the human visual system.
Hacking the brain. That is a big claim. Lay it out for us.
It all goes back to evolution. There's a theory called the savanna hypothesis.
Okay, break that down.
For the vast majority of human history, for millions of years, we lived in nature. We evolved on the African savanna. We did not evolve in square rooms with white walls and perfectly straight lines. We evolved surrounded by acacia trees, shifting clouds, river deltas, jagged horizons.
And all of those things are fractal.
All of those things are fractal. Our visual system, the entire hardware of our eyes and the software of our visual cortex, was developed and optimized in a world that is fundamentally fractal.
And it's a specific kind of fractal, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sources say not all fractal complexities are created equal in the eyes of our brain.
That's the key insight. Nature tends to produce fractals with a fractal dimension, a D value, in a very specific mid-range, typically between 1.3 and 1.5. A cloud is usually around 1.3. A rugged coastline is about 1.25. A tree is often 1.4. That is the visual diet our species was raised on.
Wait a second, 1.3 to 1.5, that range sounds very familiar. We were just talking about those numbers in the context of Pollock's career.
It should sound very familiar. That is exactly the fractal dimension range of Pollock's transitional and early classic period paintings. The patterns that people find most aesthetically pleasing, and this has been tested universally across many different cultures, are in that 1.3 to 1.5 sweet spot.
So you're saying our brains are literally hardwired from evolution to enjoy looking at that specific level of visual complexity.
That's the theory. They call it fractal fluency. The idea is that because our visual system evolved to process nature's fractals, it can do so very easily, very efficiently. When we look at a fractal in that sweet spot, our brain basically goes, I know this pattern. This is easy. I can process this effortlessly. And that feeling of easy processing is experienced as pleasure.
It's like the difference between reading a sentence in a language you're fluent in versus trying to translate one from a language you barely know. One is smooth and easy, the other is a struggle.
That's a perfect analogy. It's effortless looking. And
Yeah.
the amazing thing is the physiological data backs this up. The sources we looked at mentioned studies showing that viewing these mid-range fractal patterns can reduce physiological stress in the viewer by up to 60%.
60%. Are you serious? That's a massive reduction.
Yeah.
That's more effective than some medications.
It's a huge, significant effect. They've done studies where they put EEG caps on people to measure their brain waves while they look at different images. When people look at these natural mid-range fractal patterns, their brains produce a surge in alpha waves.
And alpha waves are the good ones.
Alpha waves are associated with a state of relaxed wakefulness. It's the state of being alert and aware, but calm and unstressed. It's the brain state associated with meditation or just quietly enjoying a view. It's the zone.
So looking at a Pollock isn't putting you to sleep, but it's taking the edge off your anxiety.
Right. And eye-tracking studies add another incredible layer to this. It turns out that the way our eyes move when we scan a scene is also fractal. We mentioned levee flights earlier. Our eyes do these little levee flights across an image. When the image you are looking at is also fractal, there is a kind of resonance.
The hardware matches the software.
The hardware of the eye's search pattern perfectly matches the software of the image's structure. It's like a key sliding perfectly into a lock. The whole system works with minimal friction, minimal energy cost.
So when Jackson Pollock was painting Autumn Rhythm, he was, without knowing it, creating an image that resonated perfectly with the natural mechanical movement of the human eye.
Yes. He created an image that the brain can process with extreme efficiency, which in turn induces a physiological state of pleasure and relaxation. He didn't know the neuroscience, of course. He didn't have an EEG machine in his barn. But he found that sweet spot through his own artistic intuition. He painted what felt right to him, and what felt right just so happened to be the fundamental geometry of nature.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. It completely reframes his work. It explains why, despite that initial "it's a mess" reaction, people often find themselves getting lost in these paintings. It literally feels good to look at them. It's the same feeling as staring at a campfire or watching waves crash on the shore.
It is exactly the same neurological mechanism as watching waves or staring at a fire. Those are dynamic fractals. They're fractals that move and change over time. Pollock figured out how to create a static, two-dimensional image that triggers the same profound, calming response. He captured the fire and put it on a canvas.
This has huge implications that go way beyond just art history. I mean, if looking at these patterns is a form of stress reduction technology, shouldn't we be using it? Can we build things with this knowledge?
We absolutely can, and we are. This brings us to the modern field of biophilic design. It's the idea of systematically bringing the beneficial patterns of the outdoors indoors.
And we're talking about more than just putting a potted plant in the corner of the office, right?
Much more. That's the superficial version. Real biophilic design is about embedding the geometry of nature into our architecture and our designed objects. The source material from Chris Melchior makes this really interesting distinction between art and design that's relevant here.
Right, the intrinsic versus extrinsic thing.
Yes. He argues that art is intrinsic. It's a personal exploration of the unknown. Pollock didn't know what the final painting would look like when he started. The process of creating it changed him. Design, on the other hand, is extrinsic. It's about solving a known problem for other people. Pollock was doing art, but now we can use his discoveries for design.
So how do we design with fractals? What are some of the real-world applications they're working on?
One of the coolest examples is something called relaxing floors. Researchers are working with carpet manufacturers to create floor patterns specifically for high-stress environments like airports and hospitals.
Our airports desperately need this. The security line is the definition of a high-stress environment.
Right. So these carpets use abstract fractal patterns designed with that specific stress-reducing D value, that 1.3 to 1.5 range. They don't necessarily look like trees or clouds, but the underlying math is the same. The idea is that they can subconsciously reduce stress and anxiety in the people walking on them.
That makes so much sense. If I'm standing in the TSA line and just looking down at the floor can lower my cortisol levels by even a few percent, sign me up. I want that carpet everywhere.
And it goes even further. They're developed to fractal solar panels. Instead of those ugly blue grid-like panels on a roof, imagine solar panels whose elements are arranged in a branching tree-like fractal pattern. They would look beautiful, like an art installation, but they would also be highly efficient at capturing light from different angles because, well, that's what trees evolved over millions of years to do.
It's biomimicry.
Yeah.
Copying nature's best designs to solve our own engineering problem.
Exactly. And get this, NASA's interested in this for long-duration space travel. Think about a 3-year mission to Mars. How do you keep astronauts from going stir-crazy in a small metal box?
You'd get cabin fever on a whole other level.
Right. You can't take a forest with you to Mars, but you can take the math of the forest. You can line the interior walls of the spaceship with fractal patterns or have fractal screensavers to prevent mental fatigue and something they call visual hunger.
Visual hunger, I love that term.
Yeah.
It implies that our brains crave complex visual input just as much as our bodies crave food.
I think they do. We have an appetite for complexity, and we're seeing this idea seep into pop culture too. The movies have definitely caught on.
Oh, absolutely. The source notes mentioned the incredible city folding scene in the movie Inception.
Yeah.
That is pure fractal geometry in action.
It is. The city bends back on itself, creating this infinitely repeating complex structure. Or look at the bizarre, beautiful landscapes in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, or the magic spells in Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange is a perfect example. The way the mirrors shatter and replicate and fold into these kaleidoscopic patterns. It's textbook fractal animation.
And the digital artists and special effects teams are using fractal generating algorithms, the exact same kind of math that describes Pollock's paintings, to create these otherworldly yet somehow believable environments. They look real to our brains because they follow the rules of nature's geometry, even if they depict something impossible.
It's just funny, isn't it? We start this whole conversation with a guy in a drafty barn flinging house paint with a stick, and we've ended up with NASA spaceships and Marvel movies. But it all connects back to this one fundamental idea.
That there is a hidden mathematical code to the universe, and for some reason we are deeply biologically attuned to it.
So let's try to wrap this all up and look at the big picture. We've pretty thoroughly debunked the "my kid could do that" myth. We now know it requires a masterful, intuitive control of fluid dynamics. We know it involves creating a specific mathematical code. And we know that code can literally heal our brains.
And most importantly, I think, we know that it challenges the very way we build our modern world.
That's the part that really sticks with me. We talked about the Savannah hypothesis. We evolved for a world of fractals. But just look around the room you're sitting in right now. Look at the building you work in.
It's probably a box, full of straight lines, 90-degree angles, smooth, blank, featureless walls. It is a Euclidean world. It is the geometric opposite of a fractal.
And if our brains are hardwired for fractals and find them relaxing, what does spending 90% of our lives inside a Euclidean box do to us?
And that is the final provocative thought I think we should leave everyone with. If the data says that looking at fractal patterns can reduce our physiological stress by up to 60%, then the inverse of that implies that our Euclidean environments, our cities, our offices, our schools, might be actively causing us chronic low-level stress.
Our architecture might literally be making us sick.
It's a real possibility. We talk about sick building syndrome and we think about mold or bad air quality, but maybe there's a visual sick building syndrome too. Maybe we are constantly in a state of visual strain, trying to process a geometry that doesn't fit our evolutionary software. We are starving for visual complexity and we surround ourselves with smooth, gray concrete.
That is a heavy thought. It really makes you want to go outside and just stare at a tree for 10 minutes.
Or a Pollock painting.
Or a Pollock painting. So the next time you are in a museum, and you turn that corner and see that wall of chaos, don't just walk past it. Stop for a minute. Let your eyes wander over it. Let that natural fractal search pattern kick in. You're not just looking at splattered paint on a canvas. You're looking at the fingerprint of nature. You're looking at the chaos code.
And on a biological level, your brain will thank you for it.
Absolutely. We've covered a ton of ground today, from the physics of paint to the neuroscience of beauty. If you want to dive even deeper, there's some incredible resources out there. You can actually find and watch the old films of Pollock painting online. Seeing him in motion really brings that whole levee flight dance to life.
And definitely look up the images from the fractal analysis. Seeing the mathematical grids and charts overlaid on the artwork really drives the point home in a visual way.
We'll leave it there for this deep dive. Go find some fractals in your day today. Look at a cloud, a leaf, the foam on your coffee. The code is everywhere. Thanks for listening.
Keep looking closer.